It all started with an innocent invitation. Anna and I had been friends for as long as I could remember, growing up in the same neighborhood, going to the same schools, and sharing countless memories. But it wasn't until I stepped foot into her family's home one summer that everything changed. Her sister, Lily, had always been there, quiet, a little older than us, and more reserved. I barely noticed her growing up, apart from the occasional family dinners or holidays. But that summer, something was different. I couldn't put my finger on it right away, but every time I saw her, there was a subtle shift in the air, a tension that wasn't there before. Lily was always kind, polite, but distant. We rarely spoke, exchanging only pleasantries in passing. Yet, as I spent more time at Anna's house that summer, I found myself lingering longer in her presence, noticing things about her I hadn't before. The way she moved through the house with a graceful, quiet confidence, the way her eyes would catch mine briefly before darting away. It was a particularly warm afternoon when Anna asked if I wanted to come over to swim. Her family had a pool, and I figured it would be a relaxing way to escape the heat. I arrived at their house, knocking on the door like I always did. Anna greeted me with her usual bright smile and led me inside. We made our way to the backyard, where the pool sparkled in the afternoon sun. Anna quickly ran inside to grab towels, leaving me alone by the poolside. I could hear the sound of the house, the faint hum of the air conditioning, the distant noise of the television, and then footsteps. When I looked up, there was Lily, standing at the sliding door that led to the patio, her eyes on me, watching. She stepped outside, her movements deliberate and calm. She was wearing a simple sundress, her long hair falling loosely over her shoulders. There was something about her presence that made me nervous, though I couldn't explain why. "Hey," she said softly, her voice barely carrying over the sound of the breeze. I nodded, feeling a strange flutter in my chest. She walked closer, her eyes holding mine for a moment before glancing away, and sat down on one of the lounge chairs by the pool. "You here to swim too?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation light, casual like it always had been. She shook her head. "Just enjoying the sun." There was something in her tone, something I couldn't quite place. It wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm either. She sat there, her body relaxed, but her eyes occasionally flickered toward me, a subtle tension building in the space between us. I shifted uncomfortably, the air around us thickening with unspoken words. I wasn't sure what it was. Maybe it was just my imagination, but it felt like there was a current between us, something simmering beneath the surface. Anna came back moments later, oblivious to the strange shift in the atmosphere, and we jumped into the pool. The cool water was a welcome relief from the heat, and for a while, everything felt normal. We laughed, splashed, and played like we always did. But every time I glanced over at Lily, sitting by the pool, her gaze seemed to follow me, watching. And every time I caught her looking, something inside me stirred, a feeling I didn't quite understand, but one I couldn't ignore. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, Anna suggested we head inside. We dried off, laughing about something inconsequential, but my mind kept drifting back to the way Lily's eyes had lingered on me all afternoon. After dinner, Anna suggested we watch a movie in the living room. Her parents were out for the night, and it felt like we had the whole house to ourselves. As we settled in, Lily came in quietly and sat on the opposite end of the couch, her presence unmistakable. I couldn't help but notice the way her leg brushed against mine as she sat down, a touch so light, so brief, but it sent a jolt through me. The movie played on, but I found it impossible to focus. My heart was pounding, and my skin tingled with every small, accidental touch. Lily didn't say much, but her body language spoke volumes. She shifted slightly closer throughout the movie, her arm grazing mine, her breath almost perceptible in the quiet of the room. Anna fell asleep midway through, curled up on the other end of the couch. The room felt impossibly still, the only sound the faint dialogue from the movie we were both no longer watching. My mind was racing, filled with thoughts I knew I shouldn't be having. I wasn't sure if I was imagining it, or if Lily felt the same unspoken pull between us. And then, without warning, she shifted again, her hand brushing against mine in a movement so subtle it could have been accidental. But it wasn't. I knew it wasn't. She let her hand linger, just long enough to let me know that she meant it. My breath hitched, my pulse racing, and I could feel the heat radiating off her body, so close to mine. I didn't move, didn't dare breathe, afraid that any sudden movement would break whatever spell had fallen over us. I turned my head slightly, just enough to meet her gaze, and what I saw there sent a shiver down my spine. Her eyes were dark, intense, filled with something I couldn't quite name, but it mirrored the same feeling that was building inside me. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she leaned closer, her lips just inches from my ear. "We shouldn't," she whispered, her voice so soft it was barely audible. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. "I know," I whispered back, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. The room seemed to shrink around us, the tension thickening until it was almost unbearable. And then, without another word, she closed the distance between us, her lips brushing against mine in a kiss that was soft at first, tentative. But the moment our lips touched, everything changed. The kiss deepened, slow and deliberate, filled with a passion that had been simmering beneath the surface all day. My hands moved to her waist, pulling her closer as her fingers tangled in my hair. The world outside that living room seemed to disappear, leaving just the two of us in a moment that felt both impossible and inevitable. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathing hard, our foreheads resting against each other as we tried to catch our breath. I could feel the weight of what we had just done hanging between us, but neither of us spoke. There was no going back from this, no undoing what had just happened. For a long moment, we sat there in the silence, our breath mingling in the space between us. The world outside the room seemed to fade into a distant blur, leaving only the two of us in the darkened living room, the flickering glow from the television casting shadows across the room. I could feel Lily's body so close to mine, her warmth, her scent filling the space between us. It was intoxicating, overwhelming, and completely impossible to ignore. She pulled back slightly, her eyes meeting mine in the dim light. There was a mixture of emotions on her face, desire, uncertainty, guilt. I could feel the weight of what we had just done settling over us, but I couldn't bring myself to regret it. The pull between us had been undeniable, like a force of nature neither of us could resist. "We can't," she whispered again, but this time there was less conviction in her voice. Her hand still rested on mine, her fingers tracing soft circles on the back of my hand. "I know," I whispered back, though my voice was as shaky as hers. But what? How could I explain the feelings that were rushing through me, the way every touch, every glance from her had felt like a spark igniting something deep inside me? There was no explanation that made sense, nothing that could justify what had just happened, but it didn't stop the desire from burning between us. Lily bit her lip, her eyes flickering toward Anna, who was still sound asleep on the other side of the couch, oblivious to the tension between her best friend and her sister. The sight of Anna, so peaceful and unaware, sent a pang of guilt through me, but it wasn't enough to douse the fire that had been lit between Lily and me. "I should go," Lily said softly, but she didn't move. Her hand still rested on mine, her body still so close I could feel the heat radiating from her skin. There was a war going on inside her, between what she knew was right and what she wanted, and I could feel that same war waging inside me. But instead of standing up and walking away, she stayed. Her eyes locked on mine, searching for something, permission, reassurance, maybe just a sign that she wasn't the only one struggling with these feelings. And in that moment, without saying a word, we both knew we were in too deep to walk away. "Lily," I whispered, my voice barely audible, but she heard me. She leaned in again, her breath warm against my cheek, and before I could stop myself, I kissed her again. This time, the kiss wasn't hesitant. It was filled with the tension that had been building between us for days, weeks, maybe even months, without either of us realizing it. My hands found her waist again, pulling her closer as she deepened the kiss, her fingers gripping the fabric of my shirt like she was afraid to let go. The room around us seemed to disappear, leaving only the two of us in a whirlwind of sensation. Every touch, every kiss felt like a revelation, like we were discovering something forbidden and intoxicating at the same time. I could feel her heart pounding against my chest, her breath coming in short gasps as we broke apart just long enough to catch our breath. "We really shouldn't," she said again, her voice breathless and shaky, but her body betrayed her words. She was still pressed against me, her hands still tangled in my hair, her lips hovering just inches from mine. "I know," I whispered, my forehead resting against hers, my own breath coming in ragged gasps. "But I don't want to stop." Neither of us moved for a long time, the weight of our words hanging in the air between us. We both knew this was dangerous, that crossing this line could change everything. But in that moment, it didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the way her body felt against mine, the way her lips tasted, the way every touch sent a shockwave of desire through me. She kissed me again, harder this time, more urgent. And I kissed her back, my hands roaming over her back, pulling her closer until there was no space left between us. The room was filled with the sound of our breathing, the soft rustle of fabric as we moved together, lost in the intensity of the moment. I wasn't sure how long we stayed like that, wrapped up in each other, the world outside the room forgotten. All I knew was that I didn't want it to end. I didn't want to let go of her, even though I knew I had to. The thought of what we were doing, of the consequences that would come later, barely registered in my mind as I kissed her again and again, each kiss more desperate than the last. But eventually, reality started to creep back in. The sound of Anna's stirring in her sleep, the soft creak of the house settling, the distant hum of traffic outside the window, it all started to pull us back to the present, to the undeniable fact that we couldn't stay in this moment forever. Lily pulled back first, her breath shaky, her hands still resting on my shoulders as she looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of emotions. "We can't keep doing this," she whispered, her voice laced with regret, though she didn't move away. "I know," I said again, though I wasn't sure I believed it. I didn't want this to stop, didn't want to lose the connection that had formed between us. But deep down, I knew she was right. We couldn't keep doing this. Not with Anna just a few feet away, not with the weight of our actions hanging over us. "We need to figure this out," she said softly, her fingers tracing the line of my jaw, her touch sending another jolt of desire through me. "But not here. Not like this." I nodded, though the thought of stopping, of walking away from this moment, felt impossible. But she was right. We had crossed a line that couldn't be undone, and now we had to deal with the consequences. Slowly, reluctantly, Lily stood up, her hand slipping out of mine as she moved toward the door. She paused for a moment, her eyes meeting mine one last time before she turned and slipped quietly out of the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the lingering taste of her kiss on my lips. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty doorway, my heart still pounding in my chest. The room felt colder now, the tension that had filled the space between us dissipating, leaving only the weight of what we had done hanging in the air. I sat in the quiet, the faint sounds of the television fading into the background. My mind raced, replaying everything that had just happened, Lily's touch, her kiss, the intensity of the moment. It felt unreal, like a dream that I couldn't quite shake off. But it wasn't a dream. It was real, and the consequences were real too. Anna stirred beside me, shifting in her sleep, oblivious to the storm of emotions brewing inside me. I glanced at her, my best friend, so peaceful and unaware of what had just transpired in the same room. Guilt twisted in my chest, but it was quickly followed by something else, desire, confusion, a longing for the connection I had just shared with Lily. I knew it was wrong, but the pull was too strong, too intoxicating to ignore. I stood up quietly, not wanting to wake Anna, and made my way out of the living room. The house was dark, the only light coming from the hallway lamp, casting long shadows on the walls. I wasn't sure where I was going, but my feet moved on their own, drawn toward the quiet corner of the house where Lily had disappeared moments ago. Her bedroom door was slightly ajar, and I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. What was I doing? What was I hoping to accomplish by following her? I should have walked away, should have gone home, and left everything behind. But instead, I found myself pushing the door open, stepping into the dimly lit room. Lily was sitting on the edge of her bed, her back to me, her hands folded in her lap. The soft glow from the bedside lamp cast a warm light on her figure, highlighting the tension in her posture. She must have heard me come in because she didn't turn around, didn't say anything at first. The silence between us was heavy, loaded with unspoken words and emotions we both struggled to keep at bay. After a moment, she spoke, her voice quiet and shaky. "I knew you'd come." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. I don't know why I did." Lily finally turned to look at me, her eyes filled with the same mix of emotions I had seen earlier: desire, guilt, confusion. "Because you feel it too," she said softly. "This thing between us. I don't know what it is, but I can't stop thinking about it." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut because they echoed exactly what I was feeling. There was something between us, something I couldn't explain, but it was undeniable. And it scared me as much as it excited me. "I don't want to hurt anyone," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Especially Anna." Lily's expression softened, a flicker of pain crossing her face at the mention of her sister. "I don't want to hurt her either." "But—" She trailed off, and I knew what she was trying to say, without her having to finish the sentence. But we were already in too deep. The connection between us had been ignited, and there was no way to put out the fire. I took a hesitant step forward, my body drawn to hers like a magnet. "Lily, I don't know what this is, but it's not going away." She stood up, closing the distance between us, her eyes searching mine for something, maybe reassurance, maybe understanding. "I've tried to ignore it," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I've tried to pretend that it was just a fleeting thing, but it's not. Every time I see you, it gets stronger." I reached out, my hand brushing against hers, and the moment our skin touched, I felt that familiar spark. It was like electricity coursing through me, lighting up every nerve in my body. She didn't pull away this time, and neither did I. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice laced with uncertainty. We were standing on the edge of something dangerous, something that could destroy everything if we weren't careful. But at that moment, all I could think about was her. The way her eyes darkened with desire, the way her lips had felt against mine. Lily took a deep breath, her fingers curling around mine. "I don't know, but I don't want to stop." There it was. The admission we had both been avoiding but couldn't deny any longer. We were too far gone to pretend this wasn't happening. The question was, how far were we willing to go? Without thinking, I leaned in, capturing her lips in a kiss that was more intense than the ones before. This time, there was no hesitation, no guilt holding us back. It was just us, tangled in the heat of the moment, lost in the passion that had been building between us for far too long. Her hands found their way to my shoulders, pulling me closer as I wrapped my arms around her waist. The kiss deepened, growing more urgent, more desperate, as if we were both afraid of what would happen if we stopped. Every touch, every movement felt like a revelation, like we were discovering something new about each other with each passing second. Lily's fingers slid into my hair, tugging gently as she pressed her body against mine. I could feel the tension melting away, replaced by the overwhelming need to be close to her, to feel her. It was as if the world outside didn't exist anymore. There was only us, and the connection that had been simmering beneath the surface was finally allowed to ignite. We stumbled back toward the bed, our lips never parting, our hands exploring each other's bodies with an urgency that neither of us could control. The soft sheets gave way beneath us as we tumbled onto the bed, our kisses growing more heated, more intense with every passing moment. I could feel her heartbeat against my chest, fast and erratic, matching the rhythm of my own. Her breath was hot against my skin, her hands roaming over my back, pulling me closer, as if she couldn't get enough. I didn't want to stop, didn't want to think about the consequences. All I wanted was her, in this moment, right now. "Lily," I murmured against her lips, my voice barely audible as I struggled to catch my breath. "Don't stop, she whispered, her fingers tightening their grip on me. Please don't stop. And I didn't. I couldn't. We crossed a line that night, one that we both knew we couldn't come back from. The intensity of the moment, the passion that had been building between us, it all came to a head in a way that was both exhilarating and terrifying. There was no going back now. When it was over, we lay there in the quiet, our bodies still tangled together, our breaths coming in slow, uneven gasps. The room was filled with the scent of sweat and desire, the remnants of the storm we had just unleashed. Neither of us spoke for a long time. There were no words to capture what had just happened, no easy way to explain the emotions that were coursing through us. Guilt, desire, confusion, it was all there, swirling together in a chaotic mess that neither of us knew how to untangle. I don't know what happens now, Lily finally whispered, her voice barely audible in the darkness. But I know I can't pretend this didn't happen. I nodded, my heart heavy with the weight of our actions. Neither can I. The room felt heavy with the weight of what we had just done. As Lily and I lay there in the aftermath, our bodies still close, but our minds beginning to drift back to reality, the enormity of what had transpired started to sink in. I could feel the tension in my chest, a mixture of guilt and desire warring within me. This wasn't just something we could easily walk away from. Lily shifted beside me, her fingers lightly tracing patterns on my arm as she stared up at the ceiling. There was a quiet between us, not uncomfortable, but loaded with unspoken thoughts. I knew she was thinking the same thing I was. What had we done, and where could we possibly go from here? The silence stretched on for what felt like forever, and I finally turned to look at her, needing to break the tension. Her eyes met mine, and in them, I saw the same conflict I was feeling. It was like we were standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that taking another step could lead to disaster, but unable to pull back from the precipice. Lily, I began, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to make sense of this. She nodded slowly, her hand still resting on my arm. Neither do I, she admitted, her voice soft but full of emotion. I've never felt anything like this before. And I know it's wrong, but we couldn't stop it, I finished for her, the truth of it settling between us like a heavy weight. There was no denying what had happened, no taking it back. We had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and now we had to deal with the fallout, no matter what that looked like. Lily sighed, rolling onto her side to face me fully. Her expression was conflicted, torn between the feelings she couldn't deny and the reality of the situation. What are we going to do? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. I didn't have an answer for her. How could I? This wasn't something I had ever prepared for, and there was no easy solution. We were both trapped in a web of emotions, desire, guilt, confusion, and there was no clear way out. We can't just pretend this didn't happen, I said after a long pause, echoing the thought she had voiced earlier. But at the same time, I don't know what comes next. She bit her lip, her gaze dropping to the bed between us. I don't want to hurt Anna, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her words cut through me like a knife, and the guilt I had been pushing aside came rushing back full force.
Anna.
She was my best friend, and I had just betrayed her in the worst possible way. It wasn't just the act itself, it was the feelings that had been simmering beneath the surface for so long. Feelings I had never even acknowledged until now, but that had taken root and refused to be ignored. I don't either, I said, my throat tightening with the weight of my emotions. But I don't think we can keep pretending nothing's changed. Lily's eyes met mine again, and for a moment, I saw the fear in her gaze, the fear of losing her sister, of destroying the bond they had always shared. But beneath that fear was something else. A longing. A desire that mirrored my own, despite the complications. What if? She hesitated, her voice trailing off as if she wasn't sure she should even say the words. What if what? I prompted, my heart racing as I waited for her to continue. What if we just take things one day at a time? She suggested cautiously. I don't know what this is between us, but I can't just turn it off. Maybe we can figure it out without hurting anyone. Maybe we don't have to make any decisions right now. Her words made sense, but they also filled me with uncertainty. Could we really keep this secret? Could we keep it hidden from Anna, from everyone? And even if we could, was it right to do so? But when I looked into Lily's eyes, the answer seemed simpler. The connection we had wasn't something I could walk away from, and if we tried to shut it down now, it would only make things worse. We had already crossed the line, and there was no point in pretending otherwise. Okay, I said, my voice quiet but firm. One day at a time. Lily gave me a small, tentative smile, and for a moment, the tension between us seemed to ease. It wasn't a solution, but it was something. A way to move forward without making any promises, without pretending we had all the answers. We lay there in silence for a while longer, the weight of the moment still heavy, but not as suffocating as before. I could feel the warmth of her body next to mine, the subtle rise and fall of her breath, and despite everything, I felt a strange sense of calm. Eventually, Lily sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders as she glanced toward the window. The night was still, the world outside quiet and dark, but I knew it wouldn't stay that way forever. Sooner or later, we would have to face the consequences of what we had done. But for now, in the quiet of her room, it felt like we were in our own little bubble, separate from the rest of the world. I should probably go, I said reluctantly, knowing that if I stayed any longer, the temptation to keep going would be too strong. Lily nodded, but there was a flicker of disappointment in her eyes. Yeah, you're right. I stood up, gathering my clothes, my mind still spinning with everything that had happened. As I moved to the door, Lily called out softly, "Wait." I turned, and she stood up, crossing the room in a few quick steps. Before I could react, she wrapped her arms around me, pulling me into a tight embrace. I could feel her heartbeat against my chest, fast and unsteady, and for a moment, I just held her, letting the closeness between us sink in. "Whatever happens," she whispered, her breath warm against my neck, "I don't regret this." Her words hit me harder than I expected, and I found myself tightening my hold on her, my heart aching with the same mixture of emotions I knew she was feeling. "I don't either," I admitted, my voice rough with emotion. We pulled back slightly, our foreheads resting against each other, and for a moment, everything felt right. Complicated, yes. Messy, definitely. But right. With one last lingering look, I let her go and slipped quietly out of the room, my heart still pounding in my chest. As I made my way down the hallway, back to the living room where Anna still slept peacefully, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. And there was no going back. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching Anna sleep, my mind racing with the weight of what I had done. What we had done. I knew that eventually, we would have to face the truth. But for now, all I could do was hope that when the time came, we'd find a way to make it right. The days that followed were a blur. Every moment with Lily felt charged, electric, even when we weren't alone. It was like a secret we were both carrying, a weight pressing down on us, but one we couldn't let go of. The simplest interactions, brushing past each other in the hallway, a fleeting glance when no one else was looking, became heavy with meaning. Every touch was loaded with the memory of that night. And yet, things with Anna remained the same, at least on the surface. She was her usual cheerful self, unaware of the storm that was brewing beneath the calm exterior of our friendship. I couldn't help but feel the guilt gnawing at me every time she smiled, every time she laughed at one of my jokes. But the pull toward Lily was undeniable. We continued to steal moments together, each one more intense than the last. The nights when I would stay over at Anna's, we would find ways to slip away, to meet in the quiet corners of the house where no one could find us. Every kiss, every touch only made the connection between us stronger, more impossible to ignore. But it couldn't last. Deep down, I knew that. We both did. It was a Saturday night when everything came to a head. Anna had gone out with some friends, and I was left at their house, ostensibly to help Lily with something around the house, though that was just an excuse. The tension between us had been building all day, unspoken but palpable, and when the door finally closed behind Anna, it was as if the last barrier between us had been lifted. We didn't speak as we moved toward each other, the silence between us thick with anticipation. The moment our lips met, it was like a dam had broken. The kisses were hungry, desperate, filled with the urgency of two people who knew they were on borrowed time. We stumbled into her bedroom, our hands everywhere, our breaths coming in short gasps as we gave in to the pull that had been building for so long. It was raw, intense, and completely consuming. There was no hesitation, no holding back. We crossed every line that had been holding us apart, and there was no going back. Afterward, we lay in silence, the weight of what we had done pressing down on us like a suffocating blanket. The reality of the situation hit harder than it had before. This wasn't just some secret, some forbidden desire we could keep hidden forever. Sooner or later, the truth would come out, and when it did, the consequences would be devastating. Lily shifted beside me, pulling the blanket up over her shoulders as she stared at the ceiling. I could feel the tension in her body, the same uncertainty that was gnawing at me. "What do we do now?" she whispered, her voice small and scared. I didn't have an answer. How could I? Everything felt so complicated, so impossible. We had gone too far, and there was no undoing what had happened. But the thought of hurting Anna, of losing her friendship, made my stomach twist with guilt. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice rough with emotion. "I don't know what to do." Lily turned to look at me, her eyes filled with the same mixture of emotions I was feeling: desire, guilt, fear. "I don't regret it," she said quietly. "But I don't know how to fix this." I reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Neither do I." We lay there in silence for a long time, both of us lost in our own thoughts. The gravity of the situation was sinking in, and I could feel the walls closing in around us. It was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. And it did. Anna came home earlier than expected. The sound of the front door opening sent a jolt of panic through both of us. We scrambled to pull ourselves together, to make it look like nothing had happened, but there was no undoing the mess of the situation. When Anna walked into the hallway and saw us together, the look on her face said it all. There was a moment of silence, a heartbeat of time where everything seemed to hang in the balance. Anna's eyes flickered between the two of us, confusion giving way to understanding, and then to hurt. The betrayal that flashed across her face was like a physical blow, and I felt my heart sink. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling. Neither of us said anything. What could we say? There was no excuse, no way to explain what we had done that wouldn't make it worse. "Lily?" Anna's voice cracked, her eyes wide and filled with pain. Lily stood up, her face pale, her hand shaking. "Anna, How long?" Anna interrupted, her voice breaking. "How long has this been going on?" I opened my mouth to say something, to try to explain, but the words wouldn't come. The guilt, the shame, it was all too much. I felt like I was drowning in it, unable to breathe, unable to find a way out. Anna looked at both of us, her face a mixture of disbelief and devastation. "I can't believe this," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "My best friend, and my sister." I tried to reach out to her, but she recoiled, stepping back as if my touch would burn her. "Don't," she said sharply, her voice trembling with anger. "Just don't." The room felt unbearably heavy, the air thick with the weight of our actions. I wanted to say something, to fix it, but there was nothing I could do. The damage was done, and it was irreversible. "I need you to leave," Anna said, her voice barely above a whisper, but the hurt in her words cut deep. I didn't argue. I didn't try to explain. There was nothing I could say that would make this right. So I left, the sound of the door closing behind me echoing in my ears like a final, devastating blow. As I walked away from the house, the weight of everything crashed down on me. I had ruined everything. My friendship with Anna, my connection with Lily, everything. The guilt and regret were overwhelming, suffocating, and I knew there was no going back. I wasn't sure what would happen next. I wasn't sure if Anna would ever forgive me, or if Lily and I would ever be able to face what we had done. All I knew was that everything had changed, and there was no undoing the damage. The line we had crossed had left scars that would never fully heal.